Now let us understand the export behavior and also role of number of mappers while exporting the data. So the export, to understand the export behavior, we can go back to the logs that are generated for the previous export, and you can get certain information which I have already covered a bit. So when you actually start the export, first it again starts with code generation as it was done with import. So it will issue a query onto the table which is in MySQL, and it will get the metadata of that table, and it will create a Java file which will be compiled into jar file, and this will be injected into the Sqoop binaries to help the processing of the data. Once the data is read from a file system from the export directory, data will be exported using this jar file, the same way as the import is done. And also it will create a tracking URL. So you can actually go to the tracking URL by clicking on this link. And you can see the logs of the export job the same way you can do you have done with the import. And that being said, in between, it actually uses the number of splits as 4, which is based on the default number of mappers, which is 4, same as with respect to import. But the difference is when it comes to import, data will be data will be read from the MySQL database using the primary key table, primary key of the table. It will issue something called boundary values query, which looks like select min of primary key, comma max of primary key from the table name, and it uses that min and max value with this number of splits, and then it will try to divide into those many mutually exclusive subsets of the data which is specified by the number of mappers, which is 4 by default. And then it will issue a query such as select star from table name where the primary key range in each query, and it will import. That's how import happens. But when it comes to export, it reads the data from the file system, which is nothing but HDFS in this case. For this export, the location is this one. So it reads data from here. Okay, it is not a table. It's a file system which is on HDFS. And you can confirm that by saying Hadoop fs -ls and paste. Okay. And still the number of splits are 4 by default. Depending upon the files that are there in this directory and the size of that, it will use the native feature of HDFS, which is called as block size, and it will try to define the boundaries based on the file system, and it will read that. It will not issue the select queries. It will just use the boundaries based upon the concept of block size, which you don't need to worry too much at this time. Okay, so you will just imagine that there will be 4 threads, which will somehow divide the overall file into 4 chunks and read the data. And the mutual exclusiveness can be achieved by using the native HDFS feature called block size. Once the data is read from the file system, it actually create insert statements after connecting to the database and issue the queries like this. Okay. So if there are 1 million records, there will be 1 million insert statement. Insert into, in this case, daily revenue is the table name, and then values, and then record 1 dot date, record 1 dot revenue. Actually, it will show there will be something called bind variables like this, and the values will be replaced from the data that is read from the file system, and it will generate 1 million insert commands like this. If there are 4 mappers and if there are 1 million records, approximately each thread will generate 250,000 insert statements like this, and those insert statements will be issued against the target database, and then data will be loaded into that. That being said, depending upon the size of your files, in this case it's 84 bytes, There are only 7 records in this. Depending upon the size of your files, you need to determine the number of mappers. For certification, don't worry too much about it. Leave the defaults or whatever they have specified as part of the problem statement. If they say that use 8 threads to perform the export, just use num mappers as 8. Similar to this. In this case, as our data is very small, I have added --num mappers as one. But when it comes to project, it's not that straightforward to determine just use the number of mappers depending upon the file size. You also need to understand the target database behavior, how it behaves when you try to use higher number of threads. Sometimes there can be table level logs, and it can cause some serious performance issues. And it all depends upon the target database into which you are trying to copy the data into. So you have to be a bit careful on this. You have to do enough. You have to spend enough time to evaluate how it actually behaves depending upon the target database you are using. But for certification purpose, just leave it as defaults. Or if the data set is very small, just use one or two number of mappers. And then run it. Sometimes they might ask you to use so many threads, and you just have to specify --num mappers and whatever values they want you to use, and then just perform the export. It's as straightforward as it could be. That being said, to conclude, it will actually read the data from the file system using the HDFS native concept of block size. It will determine how the data can be divided into mutually exclusive subsets. And depending upon the number of mappers, each thread will create insert statements like this for each record, and execute those execute those insert statements on the target database by connecting to the database using the JDBC URL and username and password. As long as there are right permissions for these guys, he will be able to issue the insert commands into the database. Okay. That being said, number of mappers can be overridden by using --num mappers like this.